Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski. I'll be your host for today. We've got a great hangout lined up today. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Inger Vandyke. She's a professional expedition leader and photojournalist. She's traveled through over 70 countries. Her work's taken her to every continent on Earth. Sometimes she could be in the Antarctic photographing seabirds, maybe another time in the Himalayas with snow leopards. And what she's going to talk about today, where she gets to spend a good portion of time, is in Africa and her journeys through tribal Africa. So Inger, great to be hosting you again. I'm so excited to see some of your work and some of your travels. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. How are you all? Hello.
Everybody wave. The microphones aren't on, but you can see them all waving in the corner.
I can see you all waving. Yeah, hi. All right, well, I'll share my screen and we'll get into talking about some stuff. So, okay, let's see if I can get us started. Right, everyone. Okay, well, I'm here to talk to you about one of my absolutely most favorite places in the whole world, in terms of nature and wildlife and amazing scenery. It's the continent of Africa, which I'm sure you all know because you'll have seen things like wildlife documentaries on TV and so forth. But what I'd like to talk to you about today is actually some of the people that live in Africa, because although there's a lot of stuff done with people, going on safari and seeing the wildlife, which of course is just fantastic. A lot of people don't realize how sort of harmony the people of Africa have learned to sort of live with those animals and the landscapes that they're in over many, many years. And so I've been lucky in my life in Africa that I've managed to travel all around sort of North Africa, the Horn of Africa, West Africa, and in Southern Africa. And I've done a lot of work with wildlife in those places. But one of the highlights of me being there has actually been some of the people that I've met when I've actually been traveling through them. So these are some of the countries that I've actually traveled in. That's my hand there, by the way, holding a little Himba child's hand. I will always stay hand in hand with these people. I just love them. I haven't yet met a tribe in Africa that I haven't really enjoyed meeting for one reason or another, but I'll talk to you about a couple of the basic ones, and then I'll go into the one I like the most. So these are some of the countries that I've worked in Africa, and they're countries that I've either been in or I'm going to. So this year, for example, I'm going to be working in South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, Senegal, and another country called Chad. But I've also worked in places like Ethiopia, and next year I'm going to be also in other countries around Ethiopia, including Somaliland and Djibouti, and I'll also be working in Angola. So a map, pretty much where I've travelled in Africa. So I've covered a lot of areas that sort of people classify as quite dangerous, and actually they're dangerous not because of tribes, they're dangerous mainly because of political problems that are happening there. I've been lucky in that I haven't been caught up with too many politics in these countries. I've been out in the field in really remote places, and most of the time I've been away from towns and meeting tribal people. So this is where I'm going to give you a bit of an idea what I actually had contact with and what I know about them. And then we'll start to talk about the Himba, which are my favourite people in all of Africa. So the first people I'd like to talk to you about are the Afars. The Afar people are actually very closely linked to the people of Somalia. They live in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti. So that's these three countries in the Horn of Africa. In the very pointy bit on the right-hand side, that's actually Somalia proper. Unfortunately, I can't visit there at the moment. Somalia is classified as extremely dangerous. The other three countries, on the other hand, are actually not too bad. Nice things about the Afar. Their name means earth in Amharic, and Amharic is the national language of Ethiopia. I'm not quite sure exactly what their Somali meaning is behind the Afar, to be honest. I tried to research it for this talk, but I couldn't find it. And the Afar people, they are mostly settled now in Ethiopia. Most of them live there actually than they do in other countries. And they can actually be either nomadic or transhumanic. Now, it's important to understand the difference between those two terms, because nomadic people can wander Transhumanic people follow highlands to lowlands, or they move up and down rivers with floodwaters, depending on what is better for them in terms of being able to feed their animals and feed their families. So they will they'll go up and down mountains or up and down rivers. Today, the Afar are mostly Sunni Muslims. But a couple of the older sort of tribes people still worship sacred trees, and that sort of predates anything to do with Islam. Some of the Afar people actually have really elaborate facial scarring. I'll never forget the first time I saw an Afar girl in a village. And we just come off this massive plateau on a really, really rough four-wheel drive trip, and we dropped into Afar lands, and this girl sort of waved at me from in the car, and I looked, and I was quite taken aback by the scars on her faces, which is done actually as a sign from girls moving to women, which that's quite a common thing in Africa. The women sort of change dramatically as they get older. But the thing with the Afars also is that they're often very heavily armed with guns and knives, which can seem quite dangerous when you sort of see them in the beginning, but actually for you to get caught up in trouble with them is very unusual. So the men carry a large knife, which they call a gilet, and they use it more like as a machete to harvest cotton and corn, and they often have guns too. So this is what they look like. The guy on the left is a typical Afar. So the gilet is hung around his waist, and his gun is slung over his shoulder. The young girl at the top, she actually just was, she grabbed her brother's gun and posed for a photograph for me. But the reality of that is that although that looks like a big gun in a small girl's hands, she probably wouldn't know how to use it. And the girl on the bottom right-hand side, that's a bit of an example of the Afar sort of facial scarring. So you can sort of see it's quite detailed and intricate, and is very indicative of where they're from. Second group of people I'd like to talk to you about are the Fulani. Now, the Fulani are the largest nomadic tribe in the entire world, not just Africa. There's about 20 to 25 million of them, and they live right across North Africa in the Sahara and Sub-Saharan Africa, and all of these countries here. So this is where they live. Now, the Fulani are really super friendly people. In fact, actually, I don't know how many times I've actually met Fulanis in the field, and they've always come up and said, hi. You know, they can't speak any English, but they always come and shake your hand, and they say, I'm sort of Pearl, which is the other name that they have, and they give themselves. They're really, really great people. They're Muslims also. In Senegal, where I run across them the most, they're Sufis. And Sufi Islam is an interesting form of Islam because rather than worshipping the Prophet Muhammad, they actually worship their own prophets on top of that. And so they've got their own little sort of sacred tombs and sites around the country that are worshipped by the Fulani. The thing about the Fulani is that they rarely cut down trees, but you can often see them when you're wandering through the countryside, and they've got, the men particularly, they carry these massive long poles with hooks on the end, and they grab the branches of the trees and they shake the seeds down of the acacias, and they give that to their animals as food. So in the Fulani people, beauty is really prized in women, especially with tattoos. And men and boys often wear good luck charms around their necks to help them with herding cows and herding goats. So what the Fulani look like. The girl on the bottom right is probably the most interesting out of this. You can see that in the top right is a man, an elderly man who's wearing the good luck charms around his neck. The bottom right is a typical Fulani girl. So as you can see, her bottom lip is blacker than the top lip. Now, the Fulani women have this as a tradition, and it's instantly recognizable. So when you see a girl with a really dark black lip, you think, oh, she's a Fulani or a Pearl. And what happens, this gets done when she's about 12, and the other women of the tribes do this to her. And it's actually quite painful. They burn up peanuts, and they use acacia thorns as like a needle, and they sort of tattoo the bottom lip, and it's quite painful for the girl that's having it done. So to distract that girl from the pain, the women sing to her and they dance around her to try and take her focus away from the pain. But it's an absolute rite of Fulani passage to have that done if you're a woman. Herero, they've got rather an unusual sort of outfit, and Hereros live in Angola, Botswana and Namibia in the southwest of Africa. Now, the Hereros are quite lovely people too, actually, but they're mostly Christians. They converted to Christianity probably around about 115 years ago, And but they traditionally practice ancestral worship, so they just sort of speak to their ancestors. The women wear traditional sort of German dresses from the age. I'm not quite sure what made them take that up, because actually they're very similarly linked to the Himba, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but they're actually totally different. They even speak a similar language to Himba. But they wear these incredible sort of Victorian style dresses, and they crown them with a crown of fabric on top of their heads. And yeah, so but believe it or not, they sort of look quite different to, that's them there in the side of the road in central Namibia. It was very, very lovely people. But they actually are really closely related to these people who look so totally different from them. And the Himba are possibly one of the most amazing tribes that you'll ever sort of hear about in Africa. They live quite a different life from many other tribes that live in Southern Africa. They are nomadic, so they used to sort of roam around the countryside. A lot of them have sort of stopped in Namibia, but they still sort of will wander from valley to valley or from river to river, so wherever they can get water for their animals. So this is a little Himba boy with his goat. You can tell he's a little boy because he has a little tuft of hair on his head. I'll talk about that in a minute and how they differ. So this is where they live, the Himba. They're known. There's quite a lot known about Himba, thank goodness. They're quite well studied. But they're probably most famously known as the Red Ochre people of the desert, which I'll talk to you about. But this is, they live in a place called Kakaland. And Kakaland is not really a country-defined land. It's a Himba-defined land. So it's in the northern part of Namibia, and it crosses the border into southern Angola. Now, when you go up into Kakaland, you can't find your way around using sat-nav. There's no roads. There's tracks like this, but they don't even show up on Google Earth. So if I say to my friends, I'm going to go and work with the Himba, they turn around and say, oh, well, yes, you can go. They're currently in this valley at the moment, and they give me a little mud map and show me sort of like a map on, like hand-drawn, how to find the tracks to find them. And they're fantastic. It's a really, really amazingly wild part of Africa. There's lots of very dramatic hills and very, very stark sort of desert landscapes. As you can see from this scene here, this is a track that I took my parents on last year to go and visit them. There and some cows wandering around. So the Himba actually had some food for their cows, but it was getting quite drastic when I was there last year. And the drought had already set in. This is one valley that they live in, but in the neighbouring valley, we saw things like this. Drought and rains affect the Himba probably more so than they affect any other tribe in Africa. They rely on the rains to bring them vegetation so they can feed their animals and so forth. When they don't get that rain, they themselves have a hard time finding water to drink, and the animals start to die around them. And it's quite tragic because the Himba are not poor people. They actually live quite well, and they carry a lot of stock. So they sell a lot of animals, including goats and cows. But when there's no rain and there's no water, then the cows will die, and then they do become effectively poor. Last year, at the end of the year, when I had been travelling in Kakaland, it had gotten so bad there that even the wildlife had started to die. So this is a Hartmann's mountain zebra that had died actually in the area, and that was when the wildlife starts to die, things are starting to get pretty grim. Thankfully, this year they've had a lot of rain up in Kaka, so the people are probably rejoicing and being very happy at the moment. So Himba are actually most famously known for being the red ochre people of the desert, but it's only the women who wear the red ochre. And this is a bit of an armband actually. So this is a joint between the woman's arm and her chest. And this is a band. You sort of see that really deep red, intense colour. They get this colour by searching the landscape for rocks called hematite, and hematite is an iron derivative, so it's basically like steel, and this color has come from rust. So when they grind the hematite down, they mix it with water, dry it out, it turns a rust sort of color, then they mix it with mud and animal fats, and they smear it on their body. Now, this is meant to do two things. It's meant to keep them from getting sunburned, and it's also meant to retard the hair growth on their arms and legs. So they don't like hairy arms and legs. So they rub this on their skin and it stops the hair from growing. It's only the women who do it too, by the way. It's not men. I don't know why they don't do it, but you'll see the difference in their dress in a minute. Now, one of the most fascinating things about Himba is that they can't see the color blue. People, it's probably a bit of a basic statement to say see it. What you can do is to sort of say that they just simply can't define it. So of course they see blue because they wake up and they see blue skies every day and so forth, but they don't have a name for it. And so I hope this video will start working okay so you can get an idea of it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Let's see. So did you all see that? Were you all able to see that okay?
Yeah, it took a second to get started. But then it went.
Oh, cool, excellent. So it's rather interesting, isn't it, that they can't sort of see blue. They just can't articulate a word for it. There's one thing I have noticed with Himba when I've been working with them over many years, and you'll see it in some photographs, is that their eyes do look very different to our eyes, especially in older people who may have had sort of the effects of the sun and so forth. But I don't know if actually someone's done a physical study of it, but they just simply can't see it. And considering that they live with so much blue, it's rather strange. But I'll start to tell you a little bit more about how to recognize girls from boys and children in the Himba, and actually the different phases of dress that they go through as they get older. So there's basically 3 different styles of traditional dress in Himba society for girls and boys. And the girls, when they're really little, they're usually recognized by 2 things. And one of them is the 2 plaits that come down their heads. So that's definitely, when you see a little girl with those plaits, that's a girl. Sometimes quite hard, if you didn't know this, you wouldn't know sometimes by looking at them if they're a girl or boy. And the other thing is the necklace that little girl is wearing around her neck, which is called an eha. And eha, they get a little tiny one when they're a baby, and when they're a little girl they get an eha, and that signifies that she's still a little girl. She hasn't come of age yet. So when she comes of age, she turns into this, which is a totally different set of dress altogether. It happens about when she's about 12, and a few things happen when she does. So the Himba have a very strong belief that women are more beautiful when they have a space in their front teeth. So when she turns 12, she will get the women of the village will actually help wedge a small thorn or a piece of wood between her front teeth to make the front teeth grow with a space between them. If you don't have a space between them, that's considered ugly in their society. They also have the very long hair braids, which you'll see here. They're not dreadlocks. They're actually hair extensions, and the hair extensions are covered in a little bit more clay, but the same material that I spoke to you about earlier, the red ochre and animal fat and clay. So when the hair extensions are woven into the girl's natural hair, they basically get rolled over with clay, and that's what the end result looks like. The bottom is left to sort of just be natural. Now this girl is not married, so she actually, when she's married, she'll wear a thing called an arembe, and I'll talk to you about that next. That's an arembe there. Is like a crown. Traditionally, the Himba girls would have actually made this out of antelope skin, sort of, or springbok skin. Now they actually tend to make them more out of goat skin. Remember, the name is Kova Parika. She is the wife of one of the headmen of the village that I visit when I go there. She's a lovely lady. And they also wear a thing called an OHUMBA, which is a big cone shell. And the Himba women, they love decorations anyway. But they particularly like cone shells. And for a group of people that live in the desert, you often wonder how they get seashells and how they adorn themselves with that. But they actually, they buy shells through trading routes throughout Africa, through different people. So, for example, the people in Zanzibar, they will take colourful dyes to the rest of Africa. The West Africans will pick up seashells and they'll sell them to people like the Himba in Southern Africa and so forth. So it's the traditional trading routes of people in Africa. And the women also wear some very, very strongly guarded leg guards and so forth. Now, when they start to have children, some of these little metal beads on their leg guards actually get changed to be white, and that indicates how many children they've got. But that's also that they've come of age. Can weigh up to around 80 pounds in total, and that includes all of the headdress that I've just described to you, their leg guards, and also the Himba skirts, which is actually usually made of metal and and animal skins, and it's held together with a big sort of thick strap of leather and also more metal braids. So let me talk to you about Himba boys. They look quite different, don't they? So Himba boys have usually bald heads. Their heads get shaved, or they get a little small tuft of hair on the top. So now that you can recognise between them, it would be easier if you went into a village now to pick who's a boy and who's a girl. When the boys get older and they turn into men, the traditional rite of passage was that the fathers would teach their sons how to hunt a wild animal, and when they successfully hunted a wild animal, then they would be given the right of a man, and their hair is made into what they call an ONDATU, which is the plait on the top of their head. Sadly, now the Himba men are actually sort of, they're evolving a lot faster than the Himba women are, and these days it's more common to see young Himba men without an ONDATU. It's a bit sad in some ways, but if you get into really remote parts of Kakaland, you can still see ONDATU being worn by some of the young men there. Oops. And this, when the men get married, they change from an ONDATU to a thing called an ONDUMBA. And ONDUMBA is a head covering that remains on that man's head for the remainder of his married years. It signifies that he's married. The only time he will ever take it off is if someone dies, and he will take it off as a sign of mourning, and will keep it off for up to a week. This is more what you see these days, though. This is Wapenga. Wapenga was a very sort of fierce headman of village there, and as you can see, he's wearing sort of more of a leather style jacket that's a bit more indicative of Western style clothing. So the men are losing their kind of traditional dress in many ways. The women are still keeping it. In fact, if anything, the women are more proud and even more strongly keeping it than any other tribes I've ever met, actually. So just talking about Himbas in general, one of the things that I've noticed the most about Himba children as opposed to other children in Africa and also children in our own societies is that they're incredibly quiet. The first time I heard a Himba kid make a really loud noise was just last year, actually, and I could hear one of the headman's kids, Luther's kids, yelling out to his friend down the valley while they were herding goats and so forth. But generally, the children of Himba societies, they don't yell and scream much. I don't. They're playing. So when I saw this and I photographed them playing, they don't. They might laugh, but it's quite a quiet laugh and so forth. I think they don't need to really. This is saying that your voice travels further in the desert. So I guess they don't have to. They don't actually have to yell out to even speak to each other very often. So they're quite nice. These children, they grow up without anything that we have. So they don't have bathrooms. They don't have internet. They've never seen TV. They don't learn. They don't sit in a room with power. So none of the places that they live in have electricity. So they have no idea what mobile phones are. So if you actually, and even with cameras and so forth, if I go in there with my groups and I sort of say, well, look, you know, they love seeing their photos in the cameras. They can't quite conceptualize what it is, technology. They just don't understand it. And so it's actually quite nice, to be honest, because when they play, they've only got each other to play with in between doing chores that they have to do. So it's quite good. The kids have got some really elaborate chores, and I want you to have to think about this because, you know, next time you sort of like your mum sort of turns around and says, well, you can't do this until you've cleaned your room, or, you know, you've got to go out and do some work in the garden and things like this too. Well, the Himba kids, they don't have such a huge variety of chores that they have to do. But what they actually have to do is really quite strenuous. And so these two little girls are fetching water and firewood. Now, the distance that they have to walk on foot in order to get water from where they live in their huts is actually around about 4 miles in each direction. When they finish school, they have to go and carry all the water containers, and they have to walk 4 miles, dig the water up from the ground, and so they'll get the water from deep in a well in the ground, and then they have to take the water back to their families. And on the same trip, they actually have to collect the firewood, and that's every day that they have to do that. So it's quite a tough job, especially when you consider that some of them will carry, this is just like a 2-litre water bottle, but some of them will carry up to sort of 10, 15 litre sort of water canisters on their heads, and often they don't have shoes on their feet either. And where they live is really, really tough. They've got really lots of thorns in the acacia woodlands around them. I still to this day don't know how they cope with walking around barefoot in that environment. It's amazing. They also get given the chore of looking after young animals, and so the boys and girls will do this, but it's a little boy with his goat. So now, when they take their animals out, they actually have to go and find certain bushes, like comifera in the mountains, and that's sort of an ideal feeding plant for goats. So one of their tasks is actually to sort of herd the goats towards all the feeding plants that they find in the mountains. The Himba children are now starting to go to school, but it's a fairly new development, and so forth. They haven't always been at school, and this school that's in the little ONDUMBA area in Kakaland, it only captures a small amount of kids. Still many children in Himba society are educated by their parents, so they don't get to go to school like you guys do, or even these ones. The weird thing about Himba is they don't eat bread. So they don't cook anything like you would imagine that they cook stuff. They make, this is what their staple diet is. It's like a porridge that they make from cornmeal, water, and the milk from their animals, so the milk from their cows or goats, and they have this 3 times a day. Ceremonies, they will eat meat, and these days they eat meat. Some of them eat meat beyond ceremonies, but mostly they eat this sort of porridge, and so it's made of cornmeal or another meal called mahangu, and mahangu is like a barley meal that they make. I've tasted it actually, and I personally don't like it, but I think if you live with this and this is what you grow up with, like, you get used to it. They also worship fire. They don't have a god like the other tribes that I spoke about earlier. They don't worship Islam. They don't worship Christianity. Himba actually worship fire, and their fire god is called Mukuru. Now, the interesting thing with Himbas and fire is that they will always have a fire running 24 hours in their little village. And there is an imaginary line between that fire and the headman's hut and so forth. So when you visit a Himba village, you have to be very careful to not cross that line, because as an outsider, that's considered really rude. And so it's always worth just sort of a translator where the line is, so you don't literally cross the line. Now, also with Mukuru, the children are not allowed to speak to Mukuru directly. They have to speak to Mukuru through their parents. And so if they have concerns about, you know, and the safety of their family or whatever, then they talk to their parents, and their parents talk to Mukuru about it, and then they come back with an answer, and so forth. So that's just how they believe, their system of beliefs exist. And another really fascinating thing about Himbas is, I think it's actually probably the most fascinating thing, is that the Himba women never ever take showers. So not a shower as you and I would know it. Okay, so the only time that they're actually allowed to wash using water is 3 days after they've had children. And then after that, they don't wash at all. And instead they use this, and this is a small amount of bark. It's called otjize. And otjize is a mixture of herbs and barks from the local mountains, and it mainly comes from a bush called Comifera. So once a day, the Himba women, they will go into their huts and they will burn this mixture of herbs and barks, and they lean over it and they sweat. Now that's a once a day bath. That's pretty typical. If they want to have a really good bath, what they'll do is they'll get more of this and they'll burn it, make a fire, and they'll cover themselves in a blanket and they'll completely sweat bath. So it seems pretty wild, isn't it, that they can get water, but they actually don't use it to bath at all. They do fetch it, however, because they need to drink, and also their animals need to drink too. This is a typical Himba well, and a girl fetching water from the well. I don't know if you can see on the bottom left-hand side, there's another pair of hands down there. It's a little boy actually in the well itself, handing water up to her, and she's giving the water to the animals. So it takes the Himba 3 months to dig a well, and they usually dig it in the bottom of riverbeds. So even though that river might be well and truly dry, they will dig around trying to find water at the bottom of it, because the water table is very close to the bottom of the river. And so the men will dig the water wells, that's their job, and they may take about 2 or 3 different attempts before they find a good spot for water. And when they do, they dig a hole that's about 12 feet deep to the water that they need. And then once they've dug it, they surround the outside of it with branches and bushes, so that actually stops any animals from wandering into it and falling and drowning. So, but this is the place that the kids all walk to get water as part of their chores. And the women, they will bring all of their goats and cattle down here, and they will actually use a hollowed out tree like this lady's doing here, and they'll give the water to the goats in that tree. Some Himba actually walk 3 days to buy groceries. So whereas you guys might actually sort of go, well, I feel like eating some ice cream, or I might have a chocolate bar or something like that too. If the Himba want to buy groceries, it's a once a month undertaking, and it takes 3 days. And when you're actually driving around Kakao in a car, like I do, quite often you'll see scenes like this. So this is a man and his wife, and they were on their road to town, basically to buy groceries that they can't buy. So they buy the maize meal that they make the porridge with, they buy sugar, tea, they like sort of beef stock cubes to flavour their food with. Yeah, so all that stuff you obviously can't buy in the middle of nowhere. And because they live so remote from shops, it's a 3-day walk in each direction. So 6 days out of every month is done going to town. And this is a Himba home. So this is basically, it's actually quite a nice hut, actually. It's not quite finished. The Himba homes are basically sort of mud huts that are made with mud from the surrounding area and local trees. And this one's even got on the top of the roof an oryx horn, which is actually helping the roof be held together. The men collect all of the materials that are needed to make this home, and the women actually build it. But they're quite sturdy, and believe it or not, they're quite homey inside. They're very warm and also very waterproof, which is quite surprising. So yes, they're very different sort of people, and I must say, you know, when I'm around the Himba, I'm probably at my most happiest. These are people that they're actually quite funny, and I talk to them through translators, and they often ask me some really sort of funny questions. And so if you ask them questions, they're quite keen to ask you questions, and they can ask you some rather direct ones as well too. But they're always happy to have a bit of a laugh with you and so forth, because you're obviously from a culture that is so very different to theirs and so forth. But they actually have there's a very bad thing that's often said that people who live like this are happier than we are. I think that, to be honest, the people that live like the Himba actually have a much different and more difficult life than we do. Yeah, somehow they sort of still remain happy. And if you want to listen to a Himba lady talk to you about what makes her happy, I'll try and get this one going for you so you can have a lovely clip about, and hopefully this will allow you to listen and speak, and also work it out.
Yaro kuno no jumbele nyinga ro ko jimi chatero na andi jimi no maere jimi ya jimi ri kulia bi himbi hepa mbi hepa mulandu mba vere ngume chatere na wa kuma hungiro ine wa o jubo na jiri mo nja hoto nyenu ko rakera po jini nyenu muno pera nyenu muno kweke o jami o ine mbi chatero mo nyori mbi po mbi.
She's lovely, isn't she? These are very, very nice people, and they're very easy to spend time around, actually. So I'm going to stop talking to you about the sort of tribes that I do, because I could talk to you all afternoon about them, and I'm going to open it up to questions from you guys about what some of these people are like and what my experiences are with them. So if you have any questions, fire away.
All right, Inger, thank you for that awesome presentation.
That's all right. I'll get off the sharing screen thing and we can have some questions maybe.
Yeah, if you just hit the green one, you might just have to bring up the Hangout window and then hit the green one more time.
Question. What is your favorite tradition that they do?
Sorry?
What is your favorite tradition that they do?
Oh God, there's so many. I think personally, when the tradition of women in Himba turn from girls to women, and it's actually a ceremony. You know, when I explained to you, they've got the two plaits that come down on their head like that. Well, the men help them cut that off, and it's like the men are also helping the women to become the girls to become women, and the whole village has dances and they sing, and it's a huge celebration when she becomes a woman. So I quite like that the most.
Angelica has a question.
Okay, well, I wanted to know, like, why don't the people live closer to the water so they don't have to walk so far?
I think a decision made by Himba who lives somewhere is actually depends not so much on water, but actually depends on where other members of the Himba tribes live. Can you still hear me? My sound sort of dropped out a bit.
I can still hear you, yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's actually more sort of where the animals can get food as opposed to where they can get water. It's never really too far away from river, but they will choose a place where they can feed their animals first. Then they might have to follow the river upwards until they find a suitable place for water. But once they sort of stop for a while, they'll stop there for a bit. And it's only when the water starts to dry up and the animal food starts to run out that they will move on to another place.
All right. Well, we just took a question from Mrs. Tibshirani's group in Ottawa, Ontario, and I believe that second one just came from Mrs. Napinska's in Kitchener, Ontario. Let's jump into New Jersey really quick to Mrs. Baylor's class and get a question from them if they have one.
What age do the Himba tribe people learn to hunt? When do they learn to hunt? What age?
The boys are the ones who hunt, and they learn to hunt at around about 17. So when you guys would finish high school, the boys actually, I think it's between 15 and 17 actually, but it's actually more 17. And they're tasked with actually going to hunt a wild animal. But that's kind of dying out now because now with conservation and the animals that they live around being quite scarce, sadly it's not, those sorts of traditions are not being followed much anymore. I think it's a good thing too in some ways because we need our animals too. But yeah, changing. So I think now what happens when they change the way they dress. There's another person with a question in the same class. I saw a hand go up.
Let's jump to our fourth group, Mrs. Sinclair's group in Montana, see if they have a question, and then we'll swing back to the other classrooms.
Oh. Hi guys.
Where are you right now?
I'm in England, but I've just only come back from Africa actually. I was only in Africa last week. I was in a place called Senegal in northwestern Africa. And yeah, I'm in quite a different environment. So last week I was in an environment where there were lots of Fulani people that I told you about. And they had moved their animals out towards the coast of Senegal to get water because they're having a very bad drought. And so I was in sort of like Fahrenheit last week and dust and sandstorms. And now I'm back at home in England where where it's like Ottawa or Canada where it's about 15 degrees and cold and grey. It's a very strange job that I have sometimes.
All right, let's jump back to our group in Kitchener, Mrs. Napinska's classroom. Your class, or your microphone's on.
How do they get the scarring and what age? On their faces, the tattoos?
Okay, the scarring is done by adults, and again done by using something like as a blade, and so it's probably just a small knife, a bit like the gilets that I sort of pointed out to you with the Afars. It's determined by their parents, and yeah, they do it at around the age of 12, I believe. Yes, with the Afars. It's quite confronting when you see it. Actually, I must say that was my first encounter with scarred people. I'm going to be seeing them again in Chad later this year. The Fulani and the Afars also. It's the Afars mainly who scar, and yeah, it can be quite an extraordinary. They can be really almost covering their entire face. So the first girl that I saw, she actually had loads of lines going up her face and across her cheek, and she didn't look real. It was amazing. It must have been incredibly painful, but it's very important to them that they have this scarring. It's a very strong symbol of their tribe.
All right, let's jump back to our classroom in New Jersey, see if they have a question, another question. Here comes someone.
Hi.
Hi. What happens in the Himalaya when it hits winter?
Okay, I do work with tribe people in the Himalaya. In fact, I won an award for working with tribal people in the Himalaya. A lot of the Himalayan people, when it gets really cold in the winter, they will move out of the mountains and they'll go down to sort of lower altitudes so they can survive it. If they stay high up in the mountains where they go in the summer, they wouldn't survive. It's simply too cold. And so in April, in 2 months' time, I'm going back to the Himalaya to work with these people called the Changpa. And the Changpa are these people. They move up and down the mountains. So they are transhumanic. Remember that term? Depending on what the conditions are, so they can survive it. Yeah, it's quite surprising. The Himalayan people, they also have the added challenge that they have to live with very high altitudes as well. So they have a very different physical makeup to the people in Africa who live on the flatlands mostly, except for Ethiopia. Yeah, they're fascinating too.
Great question. If any classrooms do have to duck out for lunch, a couple are on the Eastern time zone, so I know it's getting close to lunch, and I know one or two had to duck out, but I'm going to jump back to Mrs. Sinclair's class for another question. But feel free to duck out if you have to. Otherwise, send someone up to the camera so I know that you still have another question. And Montana, your mic's on.
Hi.
What do they think of technology?
It's really weird. It varies very much from tribe to tribe. The Himba think it's fascinating and they don't feel threatened by it at all. So I play a funny trick with children in Africa particularly, because I know they don't know what phones are. So what I do, when you get a phone, you take a selfie and stuff. I get a phone and I flick it around to selfie mode, and then I start the video, and then I give it to them. And so effectively, because they don't know what's going on, they can only see their own reflection in the video. So they sort of go, and they don't know, but they're actually taping themselves. And it's quite funny. And I've often posted these sort of videos to social media and stuff like that too. Some kids get it because they understand what technology means. But that works really well for people like the Himba and also like the Amharas in Ethiopia and so forth. If you go to Afars and you show them this, they can get quite frightened by it. And it was the first time I'd actually seen, and I didn't want to scare them, obviously because they're carrying big guns and knives, so I would have been scared too. But when I sort of showed them the camera, they were like, oh, no. It was like I would show them a bad spirit or something, and it took them a very long time to get used to me photographing them, because I didn't see too many white people in the village that I met the Afar people in. And so I started taking photographs, and some were scared and they were like, they didn't want it. And then the children started to get into it, and they really enjoyed having their photo taken. And as I was taking their photographs, it was kind of like I could feel these little fingers in my hair, and it was kind of like, dare to touch the white girl. But they were really nice in the end. It just took a little while for them to get used to it. Once they realized that I wasn't an evil spirit carrying this terrible thing that was going to take that spirit away, or their spirit away, they were very friendly with me. So
All right, I see both of the other classrooms are up at the camera, so we'll start in Kitchener first. Mike's on.
Wait, my question now? Yes, yeah. Okay. Why are the Himba kids not allowed to talk to Makuru?
It's not something that the communication between the Himba and their god is something that only takes place with parents and adults. I think they must believe that their children are just too young to talk to them. So I think that they would probably articulate the child's concerns to Makuru a little bit better, and so forth. I also think that maybe with Makuru, the children might they sort of foster a bit of a belief that Makuru will answer them, and and Makuru of course doesn't answer them, is in the fire. So I think it's a way of the children sort of saying, well, I spoke to Makuru, and this is what he said. And really, I think it's in all honesty, and not that I would degrade that belief, of course that's what they do believe, but it's probably a way of them actually sort of getting together with other parents and saying, look, our child has asked us this, what do we think we should tell them? But yeah, no, they don't allow it. I'm not really exactly sure why, but yeah. It's like
all right, and then back to New Jersey. I think I see someone at the camera.
Do you guys have a question?
No.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Do you have any questions? Okay. Hi.
Sorry, Montana, I can see you right up at the camera. Go ahead.
Why don't they shower? Why don't
well, they simply they shower in a different way, I guess. So with the smoke bath, it's quite funny. You would think they'd smell, right? What happens when you guys go without a shower for a few days? You think, oh, I need to have a shower. It's terrible. And either that or your mom makes you go and have a shower, don't they? And they make you go and have a bath and stuff. Like Himba don't smell. They don't smell like we smell. In fact, they actually smell really nice. The women, because of the bark that they use in the smoke, they sort of smell like leather. So if you smelt a leather handbag or a leather jacket, and you have that sort of smell, that's what they smell like. It's quite amazing considering they don't wash. And they can't also wash their dress off. So the dress that I've shown you in the photographs, that's not a ceremonial dress. That's the dress they wear every day. That thing that weighs 80 pounds and so forth. They sleep in it. They go and fetch water in it. They will go and they'll give birth to their children in that dress and so forth. They wear that dress every day. So they can't simply spend the whole day redressing once they've had a wash with water. It's quite strange, huh?
All right. It's definitely different, but when you've grown up in different cultures, it's the normal, right? So to them, it's what we do is very different and very unusual.
Yeah, and actually, I think sometimes to them we stink. Yeah, we smell of deodorant and sunscreen and all these things that are very alien to them.
So again, anybody, if you have to leave for lunch, feel free to. But my grade 7s would like to pop in and ask a couple questions before we wrap up for today. So here's Blair to start us off.
Hi.
How many tribes are in Africa in general?
Oh, very hard to know. I would hazard a guess several hundred. Most countries have quite a lot of tribes of their own. Ethiopia is a classic example. They have the tribal people like the Mercy and the Himba and so forth down in the Omo Valley. Then they've got tribal Amharic people who live in the highlands, and then the Afars in the northeast near Somalia. They also have ethnic Somalis living there. So that's just one country alone, and that has about 8 key tribal people, but probably about, another sort of 7 or 8 different ethnicities within those people living there. Now, every country in Africa has that. Now, the thing is, though, so there's probably several hundred. However, a lot of the tribal people these days, you don't see them as much because they don't practice their tribal instincts anymore and their tribal traditions. And so a lot of them look a bit more like homies. And they look like black African rap dancers and things like that too, because they've lost that culture and they've embraced ours. So it's only the people that I have shown you here that have managed to sort of keep it, and some other tribes.
Okay, and then here's Alyssa.
Hi. How long have they been doing the tradition of them getting tattoos on their legs?
Oh, probably for centuries. I think it predates even any interest in Islam. So it's a culture that I think it started when they started worshipping trees, which is probably 700 or 800 years ago at least. Yeah, it's been going on for many years, the scarring. Yeah.
All right, and I'm just looking, maybe we'll wrap up with a question from our Mrs. Sinclair's group. I can see they've got someone right up at the camera again, so I'm going to turn it on. Your microphone. It's ready.
How many goats did you see boys carrying?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How many goats did you see boys carrying?
Oh, they'll only carry one at a time. These are quite little active. They're called African pygmy goats, and they're like little tiny goats. In fact, the one that you saw that little boy in the photograph carrying, actually that's an adult. That's not a baby goat. And so yeah, but they're quite active, and they sort of squirm around a lot. So it's quite hard to hold more than one at once. If more animals need holding and helping, then other children will pitch in and help that little boy with the animals. So.
All right, and actually, someone just snuck up from my class. They want to sneak in a question.
That's okay.
Go on up, Liam.
Okay. Have you ever messed up saying a boy was a girl or a girl was a boy?
No, I haven't, thankfully, because I did a lot of reading about Himba before I started working with them. I think if I did, they'd probably laugh at me. They're quite funny people, and they do find white people quite funny, actually, and they're quite forgiving. So they will, if you stuff up, they'll usually just giggle. So they won't turn around and kill you like you might think.
All right, well, Inger, I'm gonna take the hangout off air, but I can still see people coming up to camera. So if we go off air, do you still have a few more minutes to hang out and ask or answer a few more questions?
Oh, yeah,
all right. So I want to thank all our classrooms for joining in. We are going to go officially off air, but if you do have more questions, stick around. We'll do a few after hours on air. So again, thanks everybody. Inger, thank you so much for sharing some of your travels and some of the amazing people you've met. And the classrooms are saying goodbye and thank you. Let me turn their mics on. There they go.
I have a question.
Yeah, you can have a question. It's cool.